Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rose Report. Tonight, my guest is State Assemblyman Kevin Kiley, who's running in the California recall. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So just to start off, I wanted to know, to give the viewers a bit of background, what was your effort in the recall effort before you decided to run, or did you have any involvement in it?
I did. I got involved with the recall probably towards the end of last year. And it had already been kind of building momentum for some time, but I'd been fighting back against Gavin Newsom's one-man rule in the Capitol in every way that I could. I filed a lawsuit against him and actually won a trial for him abusing his emergency powers. I'd introduced resolutions to terminate the state of emergency. I'd worked at the local level to try to, protest his lockdowns. But really, I came to see the recall as bringing a whole new element to the equation, to putting the mark of the people of our state directly on our government. So this eventually became the greatest citizens movement in California history, 2.1 million signatures. I held 50 events up and down the state while signatures were being gathered to try to help get the word out and just to support the people who are on the front lines making this happen. And when I decided to run as a candidate, I really viewed it as carrying the torch of that movement. How do we take this demand for change that is coming from the people of the state, and then if elected, immediately translate that into the change in direction that we need at the Capitol?
And what was your motivating factor? Obviously, you had an insight into what was going on in the government at being a state assembly member, but what was the motivating factor to run yourself?
Well, it was just to be able to bring the movement across the finish line, because I, can see that across the state, this is a movement that isn't just about some of the standard political debates we usually have. It's about something much more fundamental, which is the right of the people to have a government that represents them and that actually serves them. And I've been at the Capitol for 5 years, and I have seen closer than anyone how we do not have that. We have a state government that is broken, that is corrupted, that serves special interests. And so I came to view my experience in the legislature fighting back there as the kind of preparation that is needed if within just the next year, because there's another election in 2022, we're going to be able to have the sort of immediate action in order to, bring real improvements to people's quality of life immediately. So then by the 2022 election, they'll face a very clear choice about continuing down this path or going back to the decline and failures of the past.
And because you were in government, you're certainly not a political outsider. You were a prosecutor or deputy attorney general. There are other candidates in the Republican race who have been outsiders. The GOP voters like an outsider candidate. They have a preference for it. Why do you think that your time in government is a positive rather than a negative? How can that help you if you were to win?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I actually ran for the assembly in 2016 very much as an outsider. As you mentioned, I'd been a high school teacher in the inner city. I'd been defending the Constitution in our courts. I had been a prosecutor of violent felons. And I decided to run. I'd never run for office before, but I ran for the legislature precisely because I saw our state government as being broken. And so I've tried over the last 5 years, and I've used my experiences throughout my career to inform my approach to policymaking. And I've tried to do what I can to get at our state's core problems, but I have not, as a single member of the legislature, been able to turn our state around. And honestly, a governor on his own couldn't do that either. But I do think that I'd be ready on day one to take the mandate to answer the call for change that this recall represents, because that will change the game. If we get the people of the state to say, we want Gavin Newsom out and we want change, then I'd know how to immediately translate that into the sort of change that we need. And it's going to be, it's going to be a challenge, though, finding ways to creatively use executive authority where appropriate to unwind Gavin Newsom's one-man rule and some of the other failed policies of the past, while applying the right pressure to the legislature to actually start to do its job.
And now just sort of switching gears to education a bit, a lot of parents are involved in this recall. They're very worried about the school closures that have been happening. When the pandemic struck, there was not a massive statewide framework for digital learning or online learning. And that's been something Governor Gavin Newsom has fought at every move to stop students from switching over to it. As governor, would you work to build out a digital framework for online learning or distance learning, because you have so many resources with tech innovators there in California?
Well, I would certainly, I don't know that we necessarily need, a single framework imposed upon the whole state, but I think that perhaps the state could provide resources to help districts develop their own platforms as appropriate. And, as you mentioned, there was basically nothing on offer in a lot of parts of the state when the shutdown began. And so families started turning to charter schools that had already developed really good distance learning platforms. And as you mentioned, the state, Gavin Newsom and the legislature actually tried to stop that. They passed legislation to deny funding to charter schools for their new students, and to this day continue to discriminate against non-classroom based charters, and even tried to essentially deal a death knell to that sector of our public education system with a bill this year. And so I think that, that I favor putting choice in the hands of parents. And so, there are some parents who, even before COVID-19, to some degree or another, chose to include distance learning as part of their child's education. And I think that, the state perhaps has a role to play in providing the tools to those districts, those charter schools, those parents who want to avail themselves of that option. But I don't think that sort of uniformity is the answer.
And because you're vice chair of the Assembly Education Committee, a lot of people have wondered whether or not we already know the issues that the California education system is dealing with. Do you think that we need an audit? We need to look at the California education system to figure out what the problems are, what reforms we need, or are they already known and there's just an education establishment blocking fixing them?
I think it's more the second thing. There's probably, in fact, there is some things that need to be looked at in terms of where money is going, because we have had past audits that show, for example, that LAUSD gets huge amounts of supplemental funding, but then it actually doesn't go towards the kids who are supposed to receive that funding. In fact, a lot of it just gets, kind of magically disappears at the district level, it seems, a lot of times, and doesn't actually reach students at school sites. But the sort of changes that we need in our education system are no great mystery. We can look at other states that have embraced education reform, that have embraced school choice, that have embraced the principles of chartering, which, allow for flexibility coupled with accountability. And we can institute those there, and we would get great results. And we've seen even, within the limited forms of choice that are available in California right now, they've produced great results for students and for families. So I have, as a vice chair of the Education Committee, I've introduced legislation along these lines repeatedly. Yet, the education establishment has such power at the Capitol that it hasn't gone anywhere. And so my hope is that with the success of the recall and with the number of parents who are now, very engaged, who have seen, in the most direct ways, how our state's education politics is not about kids. When we were 50th out of 50 and getting our kids back to school, I'm hoping that now we have sort of the momentum for change that we need, which is why, even though we're not seeing a willingness to do that with our legislature and governor as they're currently constituted, if we have a successful recall plus waiting in the wings as a school choice initiative for the ballot in 2022, then I think that'd be a unique opportunity to demand action by the legislature.
Yes, definitely. And California will now spend $93.7 billion from its general fund in education. It was a major increase. As governor, how would you use that money concretely and practically to close the education gap that's now emerged because there's been over a year of learning delays for many students in California?
Well, that's right. And, incredibly, we're actually now seeing some in sort of the world of the unions that control our education system saying that we shouldn't even talk about learning loss. We should just pretend that it never happened, when we know that this is, taken a devastating toll on the students who were already behind. That it's, taken existing achievement gaps and widened them considerably. And yet there are some who now just kind of want to push that reality under the rug. The broader question as to how do we use money effectively? The education budget has increased by like 40 to 50 billion plus just over the last, it's gone up so much, and yet we're not getting results for that. We keep spending more and more money and we get nothing in return. And in fact, there was a study in 2007, I believe, called Getting Down to Facts, that was organized by Stanford, that concluded that throwing more money into the system isn't going to make a difference unless you have systemic reforms. And so those sort of reforms, the ones that we've been talking about, allowing for flexibility on the part of districts and making them more like charter schools, things like teacher tenure reform and a lot of other sort of anti-teacher and anti-student policies that are pushed by the unions, allowing for parental choice, modeling our approach on what successful states have done across the country, that would get so much greater return than simply adding more money to the system. But the answer at the end of the day, the most simple answer to your question, is that money should ultimately be in the hands of parents. I favor an approach where the funding follows the child. That provides them the ability to choose the education option that is best for their child. It provides an incentive for new offerings to be developed in order to meet that demand on the part of parents, which they are now empowered to act upon. And it also gives districts an incentive to improve their practices because now parents have other options where they can, so they need to have start providing a better education in order to retain their students.
And because the people of California have faced so many failures from Gavin Newsom in so many different areas, I wanted to know, you've been in the legislature, you've done a lot of legal work. What are your biggest and most specific successes, do you think, over the last few years that voters could look to?
Well, I have, authored some of the most groundbreaking legislation to pass in recent years in my time in the legislature on issues like public safety, protecting victims of sexual assault, issues related to artificial intelligence, freedom of speech on college campuses. And I did get a significant school choice bill through the assembly or through the legislature as well, but Jerry Brown vetoed it. I've also co-authored probably by this point, hundreds of successful bipartisan bills and resolutions. And perhaps equally important, I've played a role in stopping some bad bills and trying to build coalitions to stop bad bills from passing. And we've seen, even this year, we managed to defeat AB 1316, which would have, basically made it impractical for many independent-based charters to operate. And yesterday we've learned that, we were successful in killing AB 455 for the year, which is this would have been this just a draconian vaccine passport bill. There were many, many people across the state who called their legislators, so the credit goes to them for applying that pressure. We now have another bill that has some similar things in it that we're going to have to fight, and we're going to have to make sure that Gavin Newsom doesn't do it on his own. But that is sort of the approach that I would take as governor. Is I strategically work with the legislature, and I know the people that I can work with and what issues I can work with them on. But then I'd also go directly to the people in order to provide a source of political pressure. I mean, the one thing legislators respond to is the fear of losing their job.
Right.
So if they see the governor's just lost his job, it'll be a whole new ballgame.
And just sort of in closing, this recall is driven by people who are not obsessed with national politics, but a lot of whom are very worried about their children's future in California. As a former teacher and a debater and a politician, you've spoken about low reading levels and the impact that can have. I want to know, as governor, is there any initiative or any way that you would work to improve literacy reading levels or low reading levels and make them higher?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on some of these issues in the legislature. We've kind of, veered from the best practices that people who have actually studied literacy would suggest in terms of how we teach it. A more phonics-based approach has been shown to be better than a whole word-based approach. And this has become somewhat of a heated issue in some quarters. But I would favor following the best practices that have shown to really be most effective in reaching the students who struggle with literacy most. And that's probably even getting a little more specific than is needed in some sense, because we have some parts of the state where students just aren't really being taught to read at all. There was a lawsuit filed just a couple of years ago by students against the state of California for the purpose of saying that they are not being taught literacy. They're not being taught how to read. And the state actually had to settle that lawsuit for tens of millions of dollars. So, we need to first and foremost make the sort of fundamental education reforms that we've been talking about in order to improve instruction in all subject matters. But yeah, then there are specific changes that I think we need to take when it comes to literacy as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow you on social media, and when is the California recall?
So the recall is September 14th, although people were all sent ballots, and so they've got them in your mailbox probably, and you can turn that in, you can mail it in, you can go and turn it in at a drop box. You can also just vote in person on September 14th, and you can find me on Twitter, Kevin Kiley CA, Facebook, Kevin Kiley CA, Instagram, Kevin P. Kiley, and also on my website, kileyforcalifornia.com.
Perfect. And I want to thank you for coming on, sharing your story and your information.
Thank you very much. Take care.